More evidence Joe Biden is corrupt. Another reminder to Americans that they'll stop at nothing to cover this up. The latest coming from Biden business associate Jason Galanis, who worked with Hunter Biden on a number of big deals and ended up going to prison for defrauding a tribal nation along with Devon Archer. Hunter was also in on that deal, we understand. Shocker, Hunter got away with it. From prison, though, Galanis testifying in the Biden impeachment inquiry. He says he watched Hunter call Joe Biden to discuss the Chinese dealings while they were together at the Peninsula Hotel here in New York. And it only gets worse from there. Galanis testified that call was not the only time he heard Hunter call his father regarding business matters, pointing to a separate call in which Hunter Biden put his father on speakerphone. Galanis said Russian oligarch Yelena Baturina and her husband, the former mayor of Moscow, Yuri Luzkov, were present for that call, and that was on May the 4th, 2014. This is back when Joe Biden was vice president. So we have yet another former business partner saying Joe Biden is clearly corrupt. And remember, that oligarch also found herself conveniently left off a list of sanctioned Russians during this presidential administration. It is another reminder of just how much lying the Biden boys have been doing over the last several years.
I have never discussed with my son or my brother or anyone else anything having to do with their businesses, period.
There's no evidence to support the allegations that my father was financially involved in my business because it did not happen.
It did happen, and there's tons of evidence, Hunter. This all follows last week's saga and the arrest of FBI informant Alexander Smirnov, an informant the DOJ claims lied about Joe and Hunter getting $5 million each from Burisma Energy in Ukraine. Now, over the weekend, we watched the media spike the football regarding the Smirnov arrest, attempts to use this to validate their efforts to exonerate Joe and Hunter Biden for their obvious corruption before the last election. So they're really trying to stretch this thing into something it doesn't deserve to be. Over at MSNBC, they're using this to cleverly attempt to regain trust from their viewers and from the American people. Trust not only for their reporting, but for the intel community that regularly uses MSNBC to push its nonsense. Try to follow what this reporter tries to do here.
And as it turns out, they were right. Not in the sense, they said that the laptop was part of a Russian information operation or had all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. They didn't say that the contents of the laptop were made up, and obviously we know that they weren't. Many of them have been now corroborated. What they said was they were suspicious about why that story was emerging in the middle of an election campaign and whether Russian intelligence was flogging it or was somehow amplifying it.
So Ken Delaney in there, a correspondent the intel community regularly uses to push its agenda. They give Ken tips that nobody else gets. Ken gets to look like a star with his boss. In reality, Ken is just a vessel for deep state propaganda. Ken now says that the arrest of one FBI source who was relied on for one tiny little morsel of the Biden corruption story that goes all over the world, well, that somehow exonerates the 51 intelligence officials who swore Hunter Biden's entire laptop was Russian disinformation. There's just one problem with that logic. Alexander Smirnov's claim had absolutely nothing to do with Hunter Biden's laptop. And the laptop is still very much real, verified proof of Biden corruption. Ken even admitted that. He says, yeah, the laptop's still real. But then what is he blathering about then? Well, Ken is simply stating that this proves that Russia wanted Americans to know the Biden family is corrupt before they voted. They didn't want to convince them, just wanted them to know the facts about the Biden family before they voted. And in Ken's warped mind, intel officials and NBC were virtuous in their efforts to lie to you and tell you the Bidens weren't corrupt, even when they knew otherwise, because they basically wanted you to not believe the Russians, even though in this crazy story, what the Russians were claiming actually ended up being the truth. Isn't that wild? And the intel community is still lying to you. Listen to this reporter for the Washington Post say the $5 million claim that Joe and Hunter both got $5 million from Burisma was ridiculous because there's no proof that Joe Biden ever pushed to have the Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin, who was investigating Burisma, fired.
The Washington Post, the New York Times, many mainstream outlets have reported over and over again that there's been no such proof to show that Viktor Shokin was investigating Burisma or interested in Burisma in any way.
It's just amazing. She says the Washington Post and New York Times found no evidence that Viktor Shokin was investigating Burisma. This is how their game works. They say, we've found nothing. What they don't tell you is, we've never looked. In fact, Devin Archer testified himself that Viktor Shokin had personally seized the assets of Burisma's founder a month before he was fired. The story was covered in a Ukrainian newspaper called the Kiev Post. Mykola Zlochevsky's properties and vehicle seized by Viktor Shokin, who was running that office at this time, 2016. Devin Archer says Zlochevsky fled Ukraine after this. The founder of Burisma fled Ukraine, left the country, and never came back. Archer, who's Hunter's best friend, by the way, also testified that when Zlochevsky and company, who were paying Hunter $1 million a year, by the way, leaned on Hunter to get rid of Viktor Shokin, Hunter then called his dad. He testified to this in front of Congress. This is Hunter's best friend. And soon after, Viktor Shokin was gone. None of this, not one single bit of what I just told you, has changed at all with the arrest of this Smirnov fellow, no matter how badly MSNBC and the Washington Post want you to think it has.